Hello, I'm the Earthlu Cartographer, and this is the story of what happened to Vault 111. Let me quickly lay out the structure of this video, and then we'll get into the lore. Keep in mind that though this is an area that you reach very early in the game, this video will contain information from later in the main story, so, though this game is now over 5 years old, spoiler warning. We'll start with an examination of the Vault's location in the game, compared with the area in the real world. We'll then cover a synopsis of our interactions with Vault 111 as the sole survivor, in a segment that will either be an introduction to Fallout 4, or simply as a review for those of you who don't have the content fresh in your minds. Next, we'll cover the story of Vault 111 for all the characters that are not in the sole survivor's family. We'll then dive into a deeper examination of the events that transpired, and the state of mind of those involved. We'll wrap it up with an examination of issues and interesting things about Vault 111. Let's get going here. The entrance of Vault 111 sits on a hilltop above Sanctuary Hills, a small suburban neighborhood of Concord, Massachusetts. Sanctuary Hills is built on the lands of what we know as in the real world, Minuteman National Historical Park. As a quick refresher of the most important event in the history of this land, the King's forces occupying Boston were concerned about the arsenals that the Patriot militias were holding. At 11 p.m. on April 18, 1775, 700 Redcoats left Boston, crossing the Charles River before marching on Lexington. Militias in Lexington had been warned about their advance by Paul Revere and William Dawes. When the King's men arrived in Lexington around dawn, they fought a fleeting skirmish with 77 Patriots. With the militias in retreat, the Redcoats moved on Concord, where they began to search for and destroy what weapons they could find. Their forces were split, some directly involved in searching for and destroying the weapons, while other groups guarded the roads and bridges. Several local militia groups assembled on a hill overlooking the North Bridge. At around 9:30 a.m., April 19, 1775, a 90-man force of Redcoats were confronted by a 320 to 400 strong militia force, and a battle ensued. The King's forces, outmanned and outmaneuvered, were forced to flee. This morning victory, the first American victory in the Revolution, led to a horrible day for the retreating Redcoats. Having left Boston at 11 p.m. the night before, and having marched the 15 or so miles to Concord, they fought a running battle all the way back to Boston, finally reaching Charlestown at 7 p.m. Over the day, the Patriots lost 95 men, while the Redcoats lost 273. The site of this first victory was memorialized with a statue of a Minuteman in the real world. The Minuteman statue of the battlefield depicts a Minuteman putting down his plow and taking up his musket, while in the Fallout universe, the statue appears very similar to the Lexington Minuteman statue, which is a similar statue but without the plow. Far and above this difference though, in the Fallout universe, the civil authorities made the tremendously strange choice to turn this battlefield into a neighborhood. And not only is it built on national park land, it is accessible only via the wooden North Bridge. I should be sure to tell you that this is not the original bridge in all likelihood, as even in the real world, the bridge at the site is a reconstruction. Because this bridge is a replica of a real-world structure, and because it's close to the vault in game, we can use it as a reference point. In game, the North Bridge lies to the northwest of Concord, while the real North Bridge lies approximately a half-mile north of the center of Concord. The North Bridge is northwest of Boston in game, and approximately 17 miles west-northwest of Boston in the real world. Sanctuary Hills is surrounded by water in the Fallout universe, while in the real world, the North Bridge crosses the Concord River, but there is no second river enclosing the area. With this location covered, let's look into the story of the sole survivor. Saturday, October 23rd, 2077 dawns cool and clear. The sole survivor, Nate or Nora, their spouse, Nora or Nate, and their child Sean live in a 2-bedroom house with their personal Mr. Handy robot, Codsworth. After creating our character, drinking our morning coffee with Codsworth, and watching the news, there comes a knock at the door.
It's probably that salesman. He comes for you every day.
We can ignore it for a time, but eventually we do have to speak to the visitor, a man in a yellow trench coat. After clearing things up with his rep from Vault-Tec and securing the family spots in Vault 111, we're sent down the hall to help out with Sean. Once Sean has been pacified, we hear Codsworth calling us from the living room, where the news presenter is reporting on nuclear strikes in New York and Pennsylvania. The civil defense sirens begin to scream outside, and the small family rushes out onto the street. We race for the safety of the vault, passing the external security check. We continue on up the hill. We get onto the platform leading into the vault. Just as we prepare to descend, a nuclear detonation flashes to the south. The lift lowers us into the earth as nuclear fire flashes past us overhead. At the bottom, we're greeted by the Vault Overseer and a guard welcoming us to our new home. We're scanned for radiation, given a vault suit,
Thanks.
and handed off to a lab suit-clad scientist who leads us deeper into the vault. We don our vault suit and enter the decontamination pod.
The pod will decontaminate and depressurize you before we head deeper in the vault. Just relax.
As we're rapidly cooled by the pod, it becomes clear that we've been misled by the staff. After an incomprehensible length of time, we awaken to strange figures outside our pod. In a horrible turn, Sean is kidnapped and her spouse is shot. Locked in our pod, we're helpless to stop this tragedy. The shooter, a scar-faced man, refers to us as the backup and then leaves with Sean. Ice creeps across the glass once more as we lose consciousness again. After yet another incomprehensible length of time, we regain consciousness and are freed from the pod.
Come on, come on, come on.
We rush to open our spouse's pod, but they are indeed deceased. We take their wedding band as a memento, pledging to rescue Sean and find the one who did this.
I promise.
Checking the other pods, it appears that everyone else is deceased as well. PA announcements tell us that the vault has malfunctioned and that we need to evacuate. On the monitoring terminal, we can see that everyone else has had their life support turned off. Along with this, we can see that our pod was remotely accessed for release. Who did all this? Who are these people who took your son and killed your spouse? Checking Sector B, we find that all the pod occupants are dead there too. As we try to exit the vault, we find that the door to the foyer is jammed.
Malfunction in emergency exit door override. Please.
We seek out a different path, arming ourselves with a security baton and swatting a series of rad roaches.
Giant roaches? What the hell?
Just when it seems that we'll never find a member of the staff, we find a vault-suited skeleton.
What happened here? Where is everyone?
We soon arrive in the Overseer's office, and we find another bullet hole-encircled skeleton.
Is this all that's left?
We find a fully loaded pistol on the desk, and after releasing the lock on the door, we leave the Overseer's office. The pistol helps us to clear the next hall of its half-dozen insect denizens before we finally reach the foyer. No sign of the kidnappers, but the room is a scene of death. 3 skeletons dot the room with bullet hole silhouettes. Avoiding an attack by one final roach, we find the controls to the vault door, one final barrier to escape. To interface with the door, we have to collect the Pip-Boy from the dismembered arm of the scientist nearest to the controls. The staff is dead, and the kidnappers are clearly gone. But with this device we can exit the vault and begin the hunt for Sean outside. The vault door rolls open. We cross the catwalk, board the elevator, and emerge from the vault into the sunny fall afternoon outside. It won't be long before we discover that the unknowable length of time we spent unconscious in the vault was 210 years. With no sense of the time that's passed, it's like we woke up in the pre-apocalyptic world of 2077 in the morning and went to bed in the ruins of our home 210 years later. Thus ends the opening of Fallout 4 and the bulk of the interactions of the sole survivor with Vault 111. But there's so much more to say about this vault. Let's look at the events outside the vault on the day of the bombs, focusing on the people we interact with. First, the Vault-Tec rep. Before coming to our house that beautiful morning, he was visiting our neighbors across the street. After taking our information, he moved on. When we reached the vault security gate, he's demanding entrance to the vault. After being refused entry at the point of a minigun, he's effectively scared off. We'll speak more about him later. Let's move on to our interactions with members of the United States Armed Forces. We meet or see 8 soldiers that day. 3 on the street with the APC, 1 on the hillside, 3 at the gate, the Vertibird pilot, and 1 more by the control box. Along with the military, there were also 3 Vault-Tec security guards outside the vault, guarding and operating the vault elevator. Beyond the guards, there were also the civilians who attempted in vain or managed to gain access to Vault 111, our neighbors from Sanctuary Hills. Many of them died in the vault, but there are also a lot of skeletons in civilian garb just outside the vault. Here's what I think happened that day. When the bomb detonated, the lift went into the earth, leaving those 8 members of the armed forces and 3 Vault-Tec security guards outside, along with a mob of civilians. Seeing the flash of the bomb, the civilians tried to rush the vault and were slaughtered by the soldiers guarding the gate. With their primary task complete, the soldiers returned to their vehicles. The APC got stuck in the mud to the southwest end of the Sanctuary Hills Pond, while the Vertibird attempted to fly north, either exiting the hot zone or falling to a subsequent EMP. The Vault-Tec security guards who were outside waited for the lift to come up again so that they could gain access before the fallout began. With the guards gone from the gate, more civilians attempted to storm the vault and were massacred by Vault-Tec security guards just outside the control room. The guards got into the vault and prepared for the 180 days of mandatory sheltering in place. The story of what happened to Vault 111 now moves into the vault itself. Within the vault, we were shepherded into our cryogenic pods, and without warning, we were cooled into a state of suspended animation. This deceptive act is at the heart of Vault 111's mission, as the vault's purpose was to test the long-term effects of suspended animation on unsuspecting subjects. The productive outcome of this experiment was to be ensured by the vault staff. There were 3 classifications of that staff: security, support, and science, each of which had their own set of duties. The security staff performed 8-hour patrols, checking for intrusion and monitoring equipment to ensure there were no leaks. They enforced the rules and settled disputes. The support staff kept the vault operating normally, performing maintenance on systems that kept the staff and the test subjects alive. Because Vault 111 was such a unique vault, the support staff also had to perform cooking and cleaning duties, which typically would fall outside their purview. The science staff monitored the test subjects, recording their cardiopulmonary and cognitive data hourly, and performing experiments. Only 1 member of the vault staff seems to have been absent, someone the Overseer refers to as Nordhagen. Something to mention here in passing, it could well be that Nordhagen, and potentially their family, could have been the first settlers in the area known as Nordhagen Beach. Moving on though. While the Overseer seems unaffected by the dishonesty of his interactions with the dwellers, an unnamed member of the security staff kept a log in which they revealed their own discomfort with the trick they played on the vault residents. The staff performed their duties, monitoring the test subjects, watching the readouts. Some played the Red Menace video game on the break room terminal. The Overseer worked on a freezing weapon called the Cryolator. All the while, the staff was waiting for the all-clear signal to come from Vault-Tec, to let them know it was safe to leave the vault. They lived with a timeline of a 180-day mandatory shelter period, after which the potential to leave would open up. As the staff passed the first 2 months in the vault, a rift began to form between the science team and the rest of the vault staff. The vault Christmas party was completely unattended by the science team and the Overseer, leading at least 1 member of the security team to worry that there was something that the Overseer was keeping from the rest of the staff. While the security team was concerned that they were being kept out of the loop, the Overseer investigated a strange issue that the vault experienced. Pod C3, the pod belonging to Mr. Callahan, began to thaw. They managed to keep him from thawing completely, but the Overseer was worried that Vault-Tec's equipment might have been sending errant signals, and that these external signals might be interfering with the operation of the vault's equipment. The rift between the science team and the rest of the staff continued to widen as the countdown to the end of the mandatory shelter period ticked down. The non-science team wanted information on the impending exit, but the Overseer wouldn't answer their questions, insisting they focus on their work. Supplies, namely food, began to run low. Vault 111 was never meant to be occupied long-term. The staff of the vault was there to ensure that the residents got into their pods, and that the experiment didn't fail in the early stages. The staff was given enough supplies to ride out the mandatory shelter period, and then exit the vault when the all-clear signal came. The Overseer was beginning to worry as time ran out. He explains in his logs that, like most other things they produced, Vault-Tec's message on the all-clear signal was two-faced. Most of the staff believed the all-clear signal meant, leave the vault. The Overseer believed it meant he would get further instructions from Vault-Tec. He believed that the radiation outside meant it was suicide to leave the vault after 180 days. On April 23, 2078, day 183 of the vault's occupation, the main door to the vault foyer failed, leaving the only passage out through the Overseer's office. Subsequently, the Overseer posted a member of the science team as a guard on the entrance to his office. Food supplies were low and dwindling lower. The non-science team was reaching their breaking point, and they decided they had to have an answer on when they could leave the vault. The Overseer wasn't having any of it. He screamed at them to get out of his office and demanded their remaining food and supplies. He was adamant that they would be fried by radiation if they tried to leave the vault so soon after the bombs. Hunger already had the team on edge. The Overseer's reaction was the final straw. They were going to get out with or without authorization. They collected their belongings and burst into the generator room. They fired on the science team's guard, hitting a generator with a missed shot. They raced into the Overseer's office and shot him repeatedly before he could even grab the gun off his desk to defend himself. After looting the armory and opening the way forward, they entered the foyer where they encountered the remaining members of the science team. One of these scientists, the gentleman who had escorted us to our pod, waived their employment contracts to the non-science team in a feeble attempt to get them to stand down. They shot all three of the scientists, forcing the mortally wounded scientist with a Pip-Boy to open the vault door. They ran across the catwalk and boarded the elevator to the surface. The scientist with the Pip-Boy closed the vault door behind them with the last remainder of his strength and collapsed at the base of the control panel. The remaining staff walked into the bright sunlight outside and disappeared over the horizon. The only living people in the vault for the next 149 years would be the pod occupants, sleeping soundly through the decades. Alright, we're getting into some real spoilery territory right now, so last warning. The vault received its first new visitors in 2227, people from the Institute. The Institute's cybernetically enhanced agent Kellogg and a pair of Institute scientists teleported directly into Vault 111 and found the 14 chilly bodies packed in the pods. Using the vault consoles, they awakened the vault residents, and when they located Nate and Nora's son Sean, they opened his capsule. When the parent holding Sean refused to surrender him, they were shot. On their way out of the vault with Sean, the scientists turned off the life support for all the pods but that of Sean's remaining parent, leaving them as a backup. The next time a human would walk the halls of Vault 111 would come some 60 years later, when we were released from our pod remotely via a signal from the Institute. Our escape from Vault 111 and our emergence into 2287 was orchestrated by the head of the Institute to allow us to hunt down the man who stole our son and killed our spouse.
I am Sean.
That head of the Institute is none other than our son, Sean.
Your son.
Alright, that's the story of Vault 111, both in terms of our interaction with the Vault and everyone else's, but there's still so much more to say. Let's start out with what happened to the Vault-Tec rep. While being turned away from the Vault security perimeter might seem like a death sentence, he survived the war as a ghoul, and he's still around for us to find in Good Neighbor. We can even invite him to come work for us at one of our settlements. He's a bit shocked to meet us again. On to the members of the military that helped out on the day of the bombs. There are no skeletons and army fatigues in the immediate area, leading me to believe that these men all got away in the aftermath of the detonation that we witnessed. That being said, there is an APC that can be found abandoned to the southwest of Sanctuary Hills with a single army fatigue-clad skeleton. Given its close proximity to the area, it is likely the same APC that we witnessed on the day of the bombs. As for the vertibird, there are two crashed vertibirds in the area. The one closest to the USAF satellite station Olivia is east of Vault 111. And crashed facing to the northwest. This is not a likely scenario for the vertibird we saw at 111. The vertibird crash into the roof of the Museum of Freedom in Concord is also an unlikely choice, as it crashed to the south of Vault 111, facing to the northeast, with a holotape on board saying that the vertibird was heading to West Stockbridge, a town found all the way at the west end of Massachusetts on the border with New York. This makes it an unlikely choice for the Vault 111 vertibird. As both of the nearby vertibirds appear to have been attempting to flee Boston, it would make sense that the Vault 111 vertibird could potentially be found somewhere to the north of the area, crashed by an EMP. Our interaction with the military is interesting primarily for three reasons, as I see it. First, the fact that they were there so quickly means that the government definitely had advanced warning compared to the civilian population, which is just leaving home when those sirens start, with the APC and vertibird already there. They likely waited to warn civilians, because doing so earlier would result in clogged roads that would make military movements on the ground nearly impossible. Beyond that, the political elite could also have an easier time getting to their shelters if they waited to warn the general public. The second reason I find this interaction with the military interesting is that it shows the close cooperation between Vault-Tec and the United States military, where the military here is serving as proxy agents for Vault-Tec, working at missions and security. In Fallout 76, we see how the United States military worked for WestTech in Huntersville, West Virginia, maintaining the quarantine and kidnapping test subjects under direct orders from WestTech. The military-industrial complex was incredibly close-knit in the Fallout universe. The third reason I find this interaction with the military interesting is that these soldiers did their duty in such extreme conditions. They were guarding what they would have thought was the perfect shelter to ride out the impending nuclear holocaust, and yet they held the gate, guarded the road, and made sure that the vault was secure. They had the firepower that they could have taken the vault for themselves if they wanted to, but they did their duty, and that's just impressive. Alright, let's discuss the experiment performed at Vault 111. For the uninitiated, Vault-Tec was a corporation created to build shelters for the United States government's Project Safe House. While the public purpose of these vaults was to safeguard a small percentage of the population of the United States through the projected nuclear war, the truth is that these vaults were used to perform a series of psychological and societal experiments on their occupants. The vault experiments were unknown to even most of the employees of Vault-Tec. When Dr. Martin Reed, a Vault-Tec employee working at the regional headquarters in Boston, discovered a shipment of massive quantities of liquid nitrogen to Vault 111, he couldn't conceive of its purpose, so he dug deeper. He was so upset by his discovery of the experiments that he resigned his post on the day before the bombs. We are not privy to the hypothesis that drove the Vault 111 experimentation, and to be honest, I can't really see the reason to perform this particular experiment. The idea, placing Vault dwellers in suspended animation, is not necessarily a bad one. While in suspended animation, the dwellers would require minimal sustenance and would potentially wake up ready to go whenever the time came. No need for large food storage, hydroponics, food processing equipment. There are issues with this, as the vault requires a vast supply of refrigerants and power to maintain the stasis of its inhabitants. Beyond the logistical issues, vault dwellers typically perform maintenance on the vault while they live in it. These dwellers would essentially be dead weight until the reanimation. Now let's discuss the type of suspended animation that we encounter in Vault 111. We know that we are not fully frozen, nor do we endure the typical effects of suspended animation as it exists today. A form of suspended animation has been experimented with for medical purposes, to effectively press pause on a patient until life-saving surgery can be completed. But this only works for short periods of time, as the body is usually cooled until the heart stops, meaning that the patient is effectively dead. In this cooled state, the brain consumes far less oxygen than normal, giving doctors time to operate, rewarm, and revive the patient. Scientists have managed to place dogs and pigs in a state of suspended animation for a few hours, with a process that required the animals to have their blood replaced with chilled saline. This does not appear to be what we experience in Vault 111. We know that we are chilled, not frozen, because the vault is monitoring our cardiopulmonary and cognitive activity. Our body was functioning for those 210 years at a severely reduced capacity, obviously. Whatever the exact technology that makes this possible, we seem to have been in a state of hibernation over those many years. Alright, I think that's enough on the experiment. Let's talk about the mindset of the vault staff. First, we'll consider how hunger would have affected the vault residents. As their time in the vault after the mandatory shelter period wore on, there was less and less food to consume. While they didn't seem to go without, their rations continued to decrease. In determining what effect this hunger would have on a person, we have a study we can examine, the Minnesota Starvation Experiment. With the end of the Second World War in sight, the Allies were concerned with how to help the people living in the ruins of war-torn Europe. Bombing campaigns, army movements, conscriptions, and rationing had led to severe food shortages on the continent. There was a need for the knowledge of how to help these people, many of whom were actively starving. From late 1944 to 1945, a study was conducted at the University of Minnesota. Conscientious objectors volunteered to starve themselves so that the researchers could test the effects of starvation on the subjects and test the best methods for returning starving people to health. 36 out of 200 volunteers were selected. The original plan was as follows: 3 months of eating a diet of 3,200 calories a day, 6 months of semi-starvation at 1,570 calories per day, followed by a 3-month period of restricted rehabilitation, and finally 8 weeks of unrestricted rehabilitation. The subjects were expected to lose 25% of their normal body weight, and they were fed foods available to the average European. They were expected to walk 22 miles per week and spend 25 hours a week in educational activities. Over the course of the experiment, their physiological and psychological characteristics were measured. During the period of semi-starvation, the subjects were obsessed with food, fatigued, irritable, depressed, and apathetic. While they reported a decrease in mental acuity, tests proved that this was simply a perceived decline. This tells us what we need to know, but let's close out the information on this study. They ended it prematurely as the war ended before the study was planned to conclude, and they needed to get the data to the aid workers. During the restricted rehabilitation, the subjects were given incrementally more food over time and returned to a healthy weight, while during the unrestricted rehabilitation, the subjects were apt to overeat to an extreme. Anyway though, we know that the vault staff was likely irritable, fatigued, depressed, and apathetic, dreaming about, reading about, and talking about food constantly. This brings us to the Overseer's fear of opening the vault door. The Overseer was terrified of opening the vault door, and this sentiment requires an examination of exactly how radioactive the area around Vault 111 would be by the end of the mandatory shelter period. I have to preface this with a few things. First, radiation does not act exactly the same way in the Fallout universe as it does in our universe, and biology also doesn't respond to radiation the same way. Second, we don't know the exact nature of the bomb, nor of its detonation. And third, we can only estimate the location of the detonation based on scaling with a not-to-scale map. With that being said, let's get started. I overlaid a segment of the game map on the real-world topography, lining up Concord and Natick with respect to latitude. Using this, we can see that the bomb appears to have detonated some 19 miles south-southwest of the vault. Again, this is not something that we can take to the bank, but it's the best we can do. The crater at the site of this detonation leads me to believe that this bomb hit the ground when it detonated rather than being an airburst, meaning that there would be a fair amount of fallout. To be clear with the terminology here, fallout is the materials that have been thrown up into the air by the bomb's detonation that have become radioactive. The fallout blows with the winds to literally fall out of the clouds. The time it would take for the fallout to reach Vault 111 depends mostly on the wind speed and direction. The best guess I have is that it would take approximately an hour for the fallout to reach the vault. The material of fallout is highly radioactive shortly after the bombs, but radiation is by its nature unstable, and the radioactivity of fallout falls off rapidly over the ensuing hours. The most radioactive materials are the most unstable, and they have the shortest half-life. To quote Encyclopedia Britannica, 7 hours after a nuclear explosion, residual radioactivity will have decreased to about 10% of its amount at 1 hour, and after another 48 hours, it will have decreased to 1%. The rule of thumb is that every 7-fold increase in time, the radioactivity will decrease by a factor of 10. By 28 days after a bomb's detonation, the amount of radioactivity should fall to acceptable levels for people to leave their shelters. This is not to say that this is the case everywhere, as hotspots can remain, where more of the material falls. Also, this is how it works in the real world. Radiation in the Fallout universe works differently. Case in point, the glowing sea is still glowing 210 years after the bombs. I've heard the theory that this is because the bomb's detonation turned a nearby nuclear plant into a bomb in its own right, but I don't know this to be sure. All that said, we know that by January 2078, radiation levels had dropped low enough that, at least in some parts of Appalachia and Zion Canyon, people had begun to emerge from the nuclear winter. With these things in mind, let's consider the attitude of Vault 111's overseer. First, he's waiting for orders that will never come. Now, he doesn't know that, but we can see in him an unwillingness to make an extremely important decision on his own. Second, even if the security and support staff handed over all their food, there's no more food once that food's gone. Going outside might well be dangerous, but the alternative is certain death by starvation. He seems to have had a serious fear of radiation that verges on the irrational, again given the circumstances. There is a term for this condition, radiophobia. Fear of radiation is not irrational, but it is possible to have that fear reach irrational levels. While on the subject of the Overseer, we should talk about the Cryolator. When Fallout 4 launched, the Cryolator was unique to Fallout 4 and to Vault 111. There was only one. Fallout 76 brought this weapon back 185 years before the sole survivor is set to leave Vault 111. How could this be? I've considered two possibilities. One, two inventors in two different locations, but this seems highly unlikely as it's the same weapon design. Or two, that the security and support staff stole the plans for the Cryolator on their way out. I don't have any evidence for this, but I like it more for another reason. I'm always hopeful that the remnants of the Vault 111 security and support teams will wander into Appalachia. It's only been 25 years since they left the vault. If they survived, we might see them again. Let's talk about why the Institute broke into Vault 111 to take Sean. When the bombs came down, the students and faculty of the Commonwealth Institute of Technology went underground at the university. They started to go deeper, excavating a larger and larger shelter under the school. Eventually they had a sizable facility with clean air and water, power and food. They dropped the C and the T from CIT and became simply the Institute. In their new home, they carried on with their experiments from before the war, including in the field of synthetic life. They created androids that they referred to as synths to perform work that they considered too menial or too dangerous to carry out on their own. The first two generations of these synths were highly robotic in appearance. The Institute's scientists eventually decided that they would create the best robot by copying what they saw as the best example of a robot: humans. They decided to form biological robots using human DNA as the foundation. There was just one problem. All human DNA they had access to was tainted by years of exposure to ionizing radiation. In 2227, their hunt for uncontaminated DNA bore fruit when they discovered the records of Vault 111, including the personnel manifest that showed that there was a baby in one of the pods. The powers that be dispatched Kellogg and a pair of scientists to the vault. The scientists found Sean. Kellogg extracted him, while killing Nate or Nora. Then the team disengaged with life support for all the other pods but yours, and left the vault. I don't know why they chose to kill everyone but you. That is to say, I understand why they keep you alive, but I don't know why only you. One could assume that multiple backups would be preferable to one, especially given that if there's something wrong with Sean's genome, by extension there's probably something wrong with ours as well. Regardless of that, the team left the vault with Sean, and his genetic profile became the foundations for all of the third-generation synths. A somewhat gross thing to consider here: if you choose to enter a relationship with Curie after transferring her consciousness to a synth's body, you're sleeping with what kind of amounts to a descendant of Sean's. This is also true for a certain member of the Brotherhood of Steel. These are not really your descendants, but still. Moving on. One more group to close on before we cover the issues of Vault 111. Your neighbors from Sanctuary Hills. It is true that many of your neighbors died on the day of the bombs, and more died when the Institute killed their life support. That being said, there were other neighbors who either never got into the vault, or died on the day of the bombs. 8 of your neighbors were ghoulified and still roam the wasteland together as a pack of named feral ghouls. Alright, let's talk about interesting things / issues with Vault 111. First, Vault 111 is clearly larger in the Fallout universe than the size it is when we encounter it in Fallout 4. Just to make myself clear here, my belief is that what we encounter in the Fallout games is a facsimile of the Fallout universe. We get a version with all the interesting parts left in, with all the uninteresting parts left out. If the game world were built to scale, there would be so much walking. This is not to say that there's not already a lot of walking, but as we discussed earlier, the crater appears to be approximately 19 miles south-southwest of the vault. The center of downtown Boston is like 16 miles away from Concord. It would take a lot longer to traverse the map if it were to scale, and the interesting sites would be much further apart. Beyond the exterior measurements, we can only find sectors B and C in the vault. Where's Sector A? Beyond this simple issue, where are the rest of the cryogenic chemicals stored? Where was the rest of the food and medicine stored? Why are there enough boxes to hold 270 vault suits and only 2 to 3 dozen occupants of the vault, including the 13 pod occupants that actually wore the suits? Beyond the vault's size, the entrance is very poorly designed. Don't get me wrong, it's cool, but it's also stupid. The main issue with this is that there's only one point of access, and it's via an elevator. There's no backup exit, no staircase, no ladder. If the power fails, you're screwed. If the elevator malfunctions, you're screwed. You might be thinking, well, you said the vault's bigger than we get to see, maybe it's somewhere else. That would be a viable option if the non-science team didn't massacre the science team in order to flee. If there was another way out, they would have taken it. The elevator looks cool and provides an interesting way of accessing the vault, but the engineering part of my brain screams at me how bad an idea this is. The second and final issue I have with the vault comes from the sealed way to the vault exit. When the security and support staff forced their way out of the vault, they had to use the Overseer's terminal to open the way. Despite this, the passage is sealed again when we try to get out. When we open the passage to the exit, the door opens. This does 2 things. First, it proves that the Overseer made the door, quote, malfunction, unquote, and second, it doesn't make much sense, as it should already have been opened by the actions of the security and support team. I don't have an answer as to why it's this way, aside from it being desired that you explore more of the vault. Alright, I think that's enough on Vault 111. This was my second attempt at making this video, as I wasn't happy with the quality of the sound in my 2017 version, and believe me, that one was much shorter. If you want notifications when I launch these lore videos, you can follow me at Gaming with Maps on Twitter. If you appreciate what I do here and desire to assist me financially, you can sign up to be a patron on Patreon, like my patron, Mesothelioma. Great name, horrible condition. There are links to both my Twitter and Patreon in the About page for this channel, and in the description for this video. This has been the Irresolute Cartographer. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again next time.